Hello, everybody. Grant Hunter here with another Product Growth Leaders topic of the week. Steve, I've been listening to a lot of our old conversations, and multiple times people would talk about, well, it's different for B2B than B2C. So this week, what did we do? We decided to ask the question, right? So this week, we're going to talk about B2B versus B2C product management, and we have a great panel with us today. Hi, Jason. It's so good to have you on. And I look forward to getting your thoughts on this. We got Brian Weber. We got May Wong. We've got, now this is going to be the one that messes me up. We've got Paul H. and Paul H. So Hatala and Hurwitz and Glenn Pride, all and Brian Weber. I think I said his name already, all returning panelists. And we have a new panelist today. And as of right now, as per my screen, he's sitting in the, who's that person who sits in the middle of
Alice?
Well, Alice in the Brady Bunch, but you always talked about the one in Hollywood Squares.
Oh, yeah. Charles Nelson Riley?
Charles Nelson Riley. So Vivek is right now in the Charles Nelson Riley, if I can say that, seat. So Vivek, be ready. Are you ready to go for your first Product Growth Leaders topic of the week? All right. An affirmative there. With that said, let's get started with our question. On Monday, I put the question in, how is managing a product different in B2B versus B2C? And I thought this was a pretty straightforward question. Doesn't that sound pretty straightforward, Steve?
Does to me.
May Wong, decided to say, well, I think we need to categorize it further. It's not just B2C and B2B, it's B2SMB and B2B2E and B2B to B2B to B2B2C. And May, first of all, I actually agree. I understand what you're doing. I was trying to generalize that there's only two types, but there's actually really more.
Yes.
Yeah. May is channeling her inner joy.
Well, I think I started off in B2B and I really thought, really what's the difference, right? And all of the product marketing events I ended up going to, people start almost always focused on B2C, like the consumer funnel. And I said, well, that's very different, but I guess like that's just the way things are. And when you start working in going from product marketing adjacent in B2B to a very B2B to whatever B's to C environment where you have to look at like all of the different angles, and then you realize it's not even just the buyers and the users. There's often also a separate layer that's neither buyers or users. That's like the people who are managing the in-between for the people
channel,
who buy your
the distribution. So that
the
for those who haven't heard of B2B to B2C or B2B to C, I guess would be the most direct route. Those extra to B's in the middle are your channel, right? So it could be distribution, it could be a reseller or agent. And when we're thinking about product management, right, we need to understand the whole workflow, that whole value chain. And one of the biggest mistakes people make is they never get to the end of that. They never understand who the final consumer is or customer is, whether it's a business customer or a consumer. So I loved it. I worked for GS1, which is like the standards behind the barcode, which is used a lot in that type of stuff. And it was the first time I heard that extra B2B to C, the extra to B in the middle, because we were working with the supply chain. So, all the grocery companies have people at Walmart, at headquarters, to just sort of be that extra to B. It was a really interesting thing because I never thought about that stuff. So May, I appreciate you helping us gain more clarity and what we were doing with that.
I would like to add one more little point of nuance, that it's not just suppliers. Like if you are a OEM, right? When a middleman or when the person buys your equipment or like your APIs to wrap into theirs, in a way, the end user experiences the middle tier product, not yours, but your product also has a direct consumer impact as well.
Completely agree. And I'm not going to either have May read her whole dissertation or read it for her. But I will say that, May, you called out, God, I have to page down on my notes. There's like 5 or 6 areas. Sales, there's a different way to think about sales. Marketing, support and success, stickiness, and positioning are sort of all areas where it's going to be different managing those. Any summary on that before we move forward?
I think the most important one is stickiness, because when you're working in sales, it's really easy to cost of acquisition is a huge thing, but cost of acquisition goes both ways. So if you are selling to an enterprise company, there is a lot of overhead, and once you've made the sale, a lot of companies really don't want to go through that overhead again, unless if it's a really, really, really bad user experience, or like everything just breaks down around you. So even if your product is only so, once you're past the sales process, you've got at least 1 to 3 years of stickiness, unless if
So
they
more
really hate you.
stickiness in the B2B or B2B to E, the B2E, as you talked about, enterprise,
Yeah.
larger type stuff. I would agree with that, right? And that's where a lot of people are putting their customer success teams to really make sure that stickiness happens. Jason, my friend, you came in and you just talked about how much you love May's answer.
My default to Mayor Brian.
So you've not been involved with B2C products, but you would imagine the market evaluation and customer feedback process can be quite different. Talk to me about your thinking around that.
Yeah, and I'll say that the best stickiness would be B2G, even
B2
over
government.
B2B. Yeah.
See, May, there's one you missed.
Government, enterprise, same thing.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't think so. Having sold to the
yeah.
No.
Yeah, so I was just saying that, based on how I could think of how I'm thinking about B2C and B2B, doing market evaluation, I guess specifically getting feedback from the customers is a different process. So for B2C, you're really kind of doing a wide net, whereas in a B2B situation, you have access to those customers, those contracts, like you said, customer support. So you can get probably pretty intimate details with regards to continuous feedback. Whereas B2C, you have to get a lot of feedback and then try to disseminate that information and use it. So I was just kind of tying that might be muddier when you're talking about the product management's job and role to actually get market feedback and user feedback.
No, I completely agree. I mean, the consumer is everybody on the street, right? You can, but how do you find the ones that fit your persona or segment? It can be tough. Steve, it just hit me when May was reading her dissertation that we often talk about, when we're talking about sort of product management being pulled into the tech world, we often talk about a lot of B2C technology companies, right? Product management at Facebook or Google or LinkedIn, sort of as these glamorous product management.
Where's
your take on what?
I never do that.
I do.
All the product managers on Facebook are wannabes. They don't even have the job yet. I mean, there's 20,000 people on Facebook going, how do you get a job in product management?
I'm talking about the product managers at Facebook who are really managing a feature.
On versus at. I get you.
Yeah.
Okay. You mean at Meta?
Yes, at Meta.
So I'm sorry, I totally derailed you. Were you going to ask a question in there somewhere?
What do you think is the difference as you look at what as these product management thought leaders who teach courses at other places because they're a product manager at Facebook or product manager at YouTube or product manager at name the cool app that everybody's using, TikTok.
Mm-hmm. Well, it does seem awfully convenient to me to be one step away from a consumer.
Yeah.
And yet I was doing a training session a while back, and one of the product managers came up and said, it's so easy, as Jason just kind of pointed out, it's so easy for you guys to have engagement with B2B customers. How do I do that with B2C? And I'm like, are you kidding me? I mean, it's like everybody in the neighborhood. And I said, so what's your product? And she said, oh, well, I do, I'm the product manager for online banking. And so I turned to the class of 35 people and said, does anyone here do online banking? And everybody in the room raised their hand. And I'm like, go have lunch with these people. You have to, eat with all 35 of them. And so, I think it's frankly so much easier to do B2C than getting through just the nonsense that is an enterprise. But there's also, in the consumer world, perhaps, well, let me do it another way. I was working with a company that sells high-end audio equipment. And when I said product managers need to visit customers, everybody freaked out. They're like, oh my gosh, we can't let the product managers leave the building. We rely entirely on the sales force. So I turned to the salesperson in the room and I said, when was the last time you talked to a customer? And he said, oh, yesterday. I was talking to our distributor in Delaware. And I said, well, okay, a distributor isn't a customer. A distributor is a shelf.
Yeah.
Who does he sell to? And he goes, oh, he sells to a retailer. All right, that's another.
They probably don't talk to.
Right. And keep going, and he was like 5 steps removed from an actual person who actually used their product. And so they had this belief that listening to other salespeople was the same as listening to the market. So where does the money start from? That's the challenging question. And we get so much feedback from the people who hand money around, but not the people who actually originated the money.
I completely agree. And I know you and I, as we've taught product management through the years and coach people, that's one of the key things we talk about is you need to understand the full value chain and the aspects of all of them. And if you're not talking to that end consumer, whether it's a business or a consumer, you don't understand their problems, right? You may understand the problems in the supply chain, you don't understand their problems. Paul Hatala, good to have you back on the call. Congratulations on the move and new role.
Thank you very much.
Paul said you're humbled by May's comments, especially since your first thought was that they are not so different after all. And you talked about sort of this dramatic 180-degree change you've made in product management in the past year, right? Talk to me about that.
I tend to be very simple to begin with. It's just how I cope, but regardless of what it is, I'm going to look at it in very, 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 very plain framework. Something as simple as starting with, okay, what are the political, regulatory, all the other fun stuff that people do when they dive into something new, and then you start going through the like Steve was relaying when I was on the B2B to B2B to C side. There had our regional guys for different things. We had our distributors in different areas, and then they sold to contractors who then installed at a residential site. So at that point, you even say who's the user, the contractor or the end customer.
But I could still buy that $1 piece of plastic at Home Depot.
Similar ones, yes. And then whereas now it's not so different. We sell primarily to utilities, but I talk to our internal folks like, okay, I need to start hearing from our market. Oh, okay, well, here's Josh in sales engineering. Okay, I'll start there, fine. So Josh is like, oh, I'll introduce you to our regional, and they'll introduce you to the territory manager, and then they can talk to the reps, and then we'll take it from there. And so on Monday, I'll have my first actual customer conversation in week 4, because I finally did get a rep to say, hey, can you poke this guy and set up a meeting? After they all figured out who is this new guy with this new title we've never heard from or seen before. So it's the same, to me, those are the same challenges in every industry I've been in. I've never been to an organization that understood that path and how to get information and what to do with it. So it's a template, a cookie cutter. I just go through, the answers are the same. You plug in different values.
So you back out everything to your core framework to how do you do it. It's talking to customers, understanding them. It's defining their problems.
Yeah.
It's prioritizing which ones to do. So there is a similar baseline that regardless if it's B2B, B2C, B2B2C, B2E, B2G, whatever, there's a roadmap of how can we do product management. And that's what you're meaning by, not so different really.
In each one of those, you learn that, or at least I have in my experience, that out of those, let's say 5 or 6 steps, there's 1 or 2 to the primary friction points. Either our sales team never bought into it, or the customer never had a good compelling message because it got filtered through a game of telephone.
Yep.
And whatever it happens to be, you learn very quickly. It's not the big existential problems the company thinks they have. It's usually a couple of really low hanging fruit you can do to gain look like a hero very quickly.
I like that. I really like that, because there's I think maybe that's part of it, is there's an overlap. There is a Venn diagram, and there's some of the things that are the same, and that may be core framework approach to how do you do it and things you're trying to do, but how you execute on that, how you can and get access to people is where things get different. Glenn Pride, you brought up the fact that in the B2B world, there's B2B buyer and B2B, I'm going to call it customer or consumer, because we don't use the word user, because the only other industry that uses the word user is Steve. You're on mute.
Drug dealer.
No, I triggered a rant.
Yeah,
Holy
drug
crap.
dealers. I sort of did Steve's rant for him because he stayed on mute. So
Wrong button. I meant to hit my rant button, but now it's over, so I missed it.
so B2B, there's both
Yes.
the buyer and the consumer or customer.
Yeah.
Talk to me about your experience, and also your experience with that in the healthcare value chain.
Well,
but first,
yeah.
I don't understand. Are you in the same room with Vivek? You both.
Yeah, we both have the same background. That's hilarious.
So, hey, Stanley,
This is a
Stanley has a
little bit
different
better.
suit on.
Mine's a little bit squished. So Vivek, you're gonna have to share me your image. But yeah, I got tired of people seeing the back of my house and stuff like that. And I'm like, all right, this is innocuous and it's subtle enough.
All right, back
I
to
love
the
it.
question.
Sorry, I
Yeah.
derailed you.
I had
Yeah,
noticed
easily
that.
derailed too. Well, I mean, it's we've touched on it a lot. When you get into, Grant, when we were working and the C started coming into our equation,
Yep.
where the data traffic was not just to fulfill like category management, but they're actually taking that data and presenting it out to consumers to fire up their websites. You lose contact a little bit with that and how the consumers perceive what they've received. And it's especially hard in healthcare because of HIPAA. I can't go out and identify users of the platform because I'd be breaking like every HIPAA rule on the planet.
We had gosh, I'm drawing a blank on her name right now. What former panelist? She was on one of our calls last year, and she was talking about how for the first time ever, she's doing product management at a place where legally she's not allowed to talk to her customers.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine what that must be like.
know.
But you said a key word there. It's perceptions, right?
Yeah.
And this is one of the places where I see the difference. It's the perceptions, how emotional and societal things impact perceptions differently in B2B, B2C. I had my professor, Stu Beidler, I've talked about him on the stuff before. I talked about how I like his definition of segmentation. He told me, it's like, if you like strategy, go into B2B, because B2C, it's a part of it's about understanding the emotional and the trend, not really understanding the problem. Why does somebody buy a pet rock, right? I have no idea, but obviously multiple times in my lifetime, it's become a thing that people liked, right? And so the irrationality sometimes is more logical on the B2B side, although we'll talk about that later. How, is that changing?
Don't
but I
insult
love
Rocky.
What?
Don't insult Rocky.
Is that your pet rock's name?
I don't know where he went.
Couldn't go far by himself.
Right, you
Are you
touched a
sure?
little bit of a nerve there, because literally the last thing I wrote before this meeting was about rationalization models that people use for some of our products. And feedback from one of our customers was they have mechanisms available to override their factors with proper justification. So in other words, they say we came up with a rational model if we don't like that conclusion, we'll come up with a way to figure out how to re-justify it.
Yes, I completely agree with that. I mean, if you study jobs to be done, one of the things one of the factors they talked about in it is not just the functional job to be done, but the emotional and societal job to be done. So I think you're seeing a lot more of that. And I've got a question later on that I think we can get to with that. Brian Weber, you've been very quiet.
I have been.
What's your take on this?
I think two things. First, the discovery process. I think as it's been talked about here, it's B2C. It's easier to get closer to your customer, where B2B, you have to go through that additional channel. There's one company I was at where I was trying to get branch visits to go out and visit the actual customer.
Yeah.
And I was told, that's my job. I'll tell you what they want.
The customer, the bank told you that?
Yes.
Okay.
The financial institution. It wasn't a bank,
Yeah.
but a financial institution told me, no, I'll find out what they want and I'll tell you. So that difficulty of getting to your end customer, it's a lot easier
especially when you're building a tool for somebody. Steve, you mentioned online banking, right? If they don't give you access to their clients, how do you? And yes, you ask the classroom of people, hey, who uses online banking? So awesome. Vivek, you've been quiet. You've been taking it all in. Time for your fast take.
I think what everyone said already comprises everything that I really have to say.
So you're gonna ditto it. Ditto the whole first conversation.
Yeah, no, because I kind of my experience in this has mostly been with the B2C sort of area right now. And so I don't have much more insight, and I still am relatively new in this. So as I get more and more educated and informed, I think I can share my thoughts as it comes along.
All right. Well, we have one person on here who I think has done both roles who hasn't talked yet. Paul Hurwitz.
Actually, I have not done B2C. My entire career has been in B2B.
Well, I was thinking about your current one because the product
yes,
there's got to be some user.
You are correct. Yeah, we have. Well, my current one is even stranger because we've got the customer, we've got the user, and we've got partners that we need to work with and form agreements with to distribute the product to patients directly.
So this is sort of May's B2B to C.
It's B2B to C to partner to C to, yeah.
May, are you adding that one to your list?
Because we get paid by the customer and we have to pay the partner to deliver the product to the consumer. And then we work directly with the consumers and the partners on their needs to make the whole process work.
And then add into it the government regulatory body, and
exactly.
We officially have the most complex of the options, I think.
To me, what I think makes B2B most different than B2C is that you've got the people who are your customers who pay for your product because they were sold on your value proposition. And I apologize if anybody said this beforehand. I just had work meeting that blew up. And then you've got your users who were not necessarily so interested in getting your product for their company, and they're forced to use the product that you need to provide value to them so that they want to use your product so that the buyer gets the value out of the product that they're paying you for. Because you sold the buyer on the value, but if you can't provide the value by making it good enough that the users want to use it, then you've lost that deal in the end because they're not going to see the value from it.
No, it makes a ton of sense. My
first product that I managed was a budgeting and forecasting product. So the CFOs bought the product, but they wanted their department heads to use it to enter their budget instead of Excel. So we had to make the product good enough with enough features that the department heads wanted to use it so that they would get the value from it, so that in the end, the CFO would get the value.
Well, that's basically the same story as when Salesforce came along, right? Salesforce came along and said, hey, sales guys, put your sales book in Salesforce. It'll be great for everyone other than you, right? I mean, sales management wants to know, marketing wants to know, support wants to know, everybody wants to know. And the sales guy's like, there is no upside for me on this. And yet over time, they're like, well, now we're putting leads in there and, we're actually making it a valuable tool for salespeople. But, release one was like, hey, give all your information to the company so they can fire you easily and easily replace you.
Yeah. Well, but see, doesn't the different buyer and user sometimes come into B2C as well? I didn't do it. I said I was going to do it. We were at a grand opening for a pet food store, and I talked to the guy who actually is the, head of business development for the pet food we use. And I'm like, I need to do an interview with him because we also, multiple times we've talked about, the buyer is the pet owner, the user is the pet. You've got a different buyer and user. And maybe we need to think about that because there's times that where the buyer and the user in B2C is different, but there's times where often it's the same person. Two more comments before we move on to the poll. Nils had said, a key thing is in B2B, it's easy to know who your customers are. You've got a defined set of who they could be and getting to them, where with B2C, you need to probably work more with personas and segments than individuals. And then Depro had said, another big difference is the customization. In a B2B, especially B2E, you tend to have those really, really large customers who you will customize for and do those types of deals for, where that doesn't really happen at all in the B2C space.
Well, that last comment, just for the group, does that make the B2B less customer driven? Customer being the person who uses your system in the end. You're more driven by the buyer persona versus the person using your product.
I think you definitely see a lot of B2B companies who are more obsessed with the buyer than they are with the user. And that's why UX and design is a place that you see a lot of B2B companies trying to invest in now to fix that. May, did you have a thought?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest topics that came up over and over again when I worked B2B was, are we a services company or are we a product company? Product being like software. Because there's quite a bit of services revenue attached to giant enterprise systems, right? Especially when you sold to giant banks or governments or whoever it is. So like if services is pulling in a ton of revenue, like where do you invest?
We actually just talked to a client yesterday. I said, are you SaaS? And they said, that's a complicated question. Because their software is delivered in the cloud and a one instance that's sort of in a shared, it's a SaaS software, but for their larger, more enterprise clients, they have a lot of services that go along as part of the whole product, going back to our conversation from last week, right? So I think at some point, maybe whole product even gets into it as you get into the larger enterprises versus the SMB. May, one last question before I move to the poll, and it just hit me right now. You called out B to SMB as separate from B to E. How is B to SMB, or what's it, Soho, single office, home office? Is that more like a consumer sale?
No, it depends on your sales strategy, right? It's really digital sales versus salespeople sales.
Yeah.
Digital sales, it's all automated. You can go in and you can buy it if you want. You can trial it. You can play around with it. Whatever that model is, as long as it's like fully automatic where you don't have to go through a salesperson, I feel like that is a lot closer to B2C than it is if you the second you have a contract involved, you have a salesperson involved, you have any sort of like contractual customizations involved, then that's different.
Product led almost starts taking you into the B2C mindset because you're trying to get somebody to use it for themselves and then spread it. All right.
I actually think that there is a big difference between selling to an SMB and selling to enterprise from a product perspective, because I think I sold that budgeting software. We sold it mostly to SMBs, And if you sold the CFO or the owner of the company, a small store owner, he would use it himself. So he was the buyer and the user. But as we sold up market to bigger companies, that's where the difference came in between buyer and user.
And you know, me or Steve buying something for product growth leaders is probably closer to a B2C sale than it is to a B2 enterprise sale. Jason, any last thoughts before we move on?
I'm just thinking, I attended, real quick, before I lose it. I attended a UX webinar, seminar or something, and they said something that was interesting that I think differentiates product management from B2C to B2B. From my experience in B2B, our job, well, in B2C, your job is to please the user and get them to use your product and want to use it. Where B2B, our job is to not make the user mad. I'm trying to think of any B2B products where we're like, users are excited to use it. But in B2C, that could be a lot of the case, especially when you're positioning your products.
Now I'm racking my brain trying to find a B2B product I'm excited to use. The product growth leaders community. Wait, no.
But it's, the idea is instead of pleasing the user is just not to make the user angry.
I get it.
So that might be a different, when you're talking about UX design as well.
Yeah.
Well, I think in many cases, though, with enterprise products, the design team isn't able to connect with all the personas. Using, for instance, an ERP system that you guys would recognize, I shrieked every time I used it, and throughout the time that I used it, trying to just make the thing work, and ultimately had to get with one of the tech support reps of the not the vendor, but the customer who was using the ERP system. And we would go through these fields and she'd say, oh yeah, we don't ever use that. Skip that. What about vendor type? Oh yeah, we don't care about that. Skip. Yeah. But you do have to check this button down here that says you read everything carefully, and it occurred to me as I was going through that this ERP vendor listened exclusively to the buyer side of this equation.
Yep.
Not the people who were entering their information, but the administrators who manage the information. So I mean, there's in an enterprise sale, more so than a consumer sale, there are many different personas, and in my view, the enterprise players forget where the money starts.
Yeah. No, I like that. Well, we did a poll on Wednesday where we asked what product management activity is hardest to translate from B2B to B2C. In May for you, I added or B2B to SME or B2B to C. I don't know. And the options were discovery, personas and market segments, requirements or problem stories, positioning, or other. It depends. Steve, I think it was our first poll that we did not get one other it depends vote.
Wow.
I know.
I'll
and
go online and I'll put in another for you.
Well, it's not going to change in my presentation now.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
But discovery was the clear winner. 66% of people said discovery. Jason, how'd you vote?
With the masses.
Discovery?
Yep.
Paul Hurwitz, you said for B2B product discovery can be done by knowing your individual customers or users and talking to them. B2B, B2C, the sheer volume of customers usually necessitates doing discovery via data and surveys. So for me, discovery makes it hardest. I should have just let you read that instead of reading it for you.
There's so many of the B2B products that I've worked on. I speak to the customers and the individual users directly.
Yeah.
And if you've got a B2C product, you just can't.
Yeah. Glenn, I'm assuming you were discovery.
Yeah, hang on. I don't know if Wix counts as a B2B or a B2C. Wix is the website manager that we use, so it probably is B2B because it's got email built in and it's a web thing and it's got
B to SMB is probably more like it because you know bigger companies are going to hire somebody.
Nonetheless, their tech support is delighted to connect us up with their product managers. I mean, a number of us who are using this tool will chat, hey, is there a way of doing this thing? And they're like, oh, that's a great question. Can I connect you with a product manager? And it's not so much they're just dumping us off. I mean, it's like the product manager actually is delighted to actually talk to a real person.
So what you have to understand is Steve and his two friends who do this are all product management coaches and instructors. And I think they've profiled them and they're like, okay, we're going to take care of the product management people.
But there's also I think there's also a difference between a company the size of Wix and say a company the size of Google with one of their products. They're both B2C, but there's definitely a difference.
Yeah, I get it.
Fair enough.
Glenn, was your vote discovery as well?
Yes.
Because you said I agree, and I wasn't sure what you were agreeing with. If it was agreeing with Paul.
Well, I agree it's discovery, and in both cases where I was a product manager, the product management organization was weak, and it was a very sales-led organization. So anytime you mentioned you wanted to talk to the customer, there was like walls put up just left and right, and I still wanted to know more and more about, like, what are they doing with this stuff? And so, yeah, I think discovery is hard. And I think it's really hard when you don't have a strong product management organization in place. There's a lot of
culture
barriers.
of discovery.
Yeah.
Paul Hatala, you also voted for discovery.
And I think Jason touched on one of the thoughts that was in my head when I did that. That if
he touched your head when you voted for discovery,
it's sure, it's nothing blocking it. So, but that he mentioned about, like, basically not pissing people off that are stakeholders in the process, but if you were to plot them all on a whatever Kano curve or Kano curve, however you pronounce that, there's certain people you need to delight, and then there's some people you just got to make sure they're not negative. And figuring out what that is for a different type of organization, it's a little bit of a learning curve there. Otherwise, people are normally the same, but you start mixing in 5-6 different stakeholders, and now there's a multi-dimensional problem to solve.
Yeah. Since he referenced you, Jason, how did you vote?
Oh, I told discovery.
Did I ask you already?
Yes.
When I get more than 5 people, it's hard for me to. I think I asked Brian the same question 3 times last week or 2 weeks ago. Brian, how'd you vote?
Discovery.
Discovery. May Wong. Did I ask you already?
No.
Okay.
So funny story.
You didn't vote?
I clicked on the wrong one. And then I wanted to change it to discovery, but over the course of this week, I changed it back to the one I voted for, which is the second one, and I can't read on your screen.
Personas and market segments.
Yes, that one. And the reason for that.
So you talked yourself into your wrong vote, so it wasn't a wrong vote?
No, I thought about it. So the reason I changed my mind was because I think that when you are thinking about how you want to segment your market in the B2C world or the B2B world, like it's very different, right? Oftentimes you get told, like, okay, these are your user segments, but in the B2B world, and you kind of work it out and you're like, no, that's not true, right? And also as you evolve, as your markets change, it's really hard to identify who your new market segments are, like when you have a disruptor in the space. And then when you enter the world of B2B2C, then who even knows what your market segments are, because you've got so many layers of obfuscation that trying to find out who you talk to do your discovery in the first place just becomes an absolute nightmare. So as I went through the course of working my day-to-day job this week, I have decided that discovery is not, in fact, the hardest part. It is finding out who you talk to do the discovery.
But May's vote counts the same as everybody else's, so discovery still wins. Vivek, did you vote?
Yes, I did. I actually ended up going with requirements or problem stories.
Okay.
And I was in the similar thought as May, because I was thinking in the mindset of, like, because I was thinking in my mindset of, as a B2B versus B2C, it's like when you're trying to come up with those different requirements, I think B2B, it's a much easier kind of like straightforward kind of thing. And when you're getting from a user perspective, it is, like you said, there might be a disconnect. But if you're talking from a B2C perspective, again, there's such a vast amount of customers, what it could be, and trying to nail down what specific requirements they might have could be a nightmare unless you actually get like time to talk to them. And so I don't know, that was kind of my thought process around it. Maybe
I agree. Actually, you know, I can't imagine what the requirement was for a pet rock. How do you write that? So Steve, one thing I noticed, I put the poll back up on full view. I think I have a tell.
You always put the most important answer first?
No, I always put what I vote for first.
Wait, yeah, that makes sense.
It doesn't always win.
That's a common error in creating surveys, is to not randomize the answers. And oh, by the way, that reminds me, I was my friend Bard Nelson was doing an exam of using a certification tool, and forgot to randomize when she was all done. And so all the answers were A, and the people in the room were like, this can't be right. You know, so they're reading the question 2 or 3 or 4 times. Finally, somebody came up and said, could this possibly be right? All the answers are A, but all the way through, they're like, they're messing with me.
I would have been changing answers because I'm like, there's no way that can be the case.
No
so
way.
I'm gonna make this one a B.
So you generally do the answer that you think is the answer is the one you write first, but that's why you're supposed to randomize.
Well, it just was something I noticed. I was going back through a couple, and I had to do my own research, and I started seeing it. It's not every time, but most times. So
one thing on that, I would make the case for discovery drives the rest of them. Without good discovery, you won't figure out your personas or your requirements or positioning.
I will take that as a good summary of the poll, Brian Weber. Thank you so much.
I don't know if I agree with that. Because I feel like there's the there's the initial discovery, yes, that we have to like, okay, who are the people, but then afterwards discovery becomes like a very different thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
we're gonna have to do our
people are once.
We're gonna have to redo our markets
again.
Personas and segments one with May and dig into that, but we're going to stick with B2B and B2C now. And we've you know, with the larger panel, we're not going to get through all the questions, but I'm going to go to one question before we go to the lightning round. And this is where I wanted to flip it, right? All of us in some level have been a B2B customer and a B2C customer. As a customer, what differences do you see when making a B2B versus B2C buying decision? And Jason Vincelette, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. So for B2B, I have a lot more stakeholders that would be using this. So I need to please more people if I'm buying.
So in the decision, you worry about other people's more than just yourself.
Yeah, because they're going to come to me and, you know, slit my throat if I don't make a good decision. Yeah, that's what I meant. And also you're looking at longevity of that investment. Usually in a B2B scenario, because you don't have to keep going through the sourcing process of finding another provider, whereas B2C, generally the cost of switching is low.
Okay, Paul Hurwitz. Is he old Paul or new Paul, Steve?
I would say there's a lot more on the line when you're making a B2B decision. You're responsible to more people, and you've got to justify your decision in a B2B purchase to your boss, to your stakeholders, to whomever. In a B2C, if I go into a store and I want to buy an iPhone, I'm going to buy an iPhone. I don't have to be responsible to anybody else.
Okay, you haven't met my wife because I do have to answer to somebody else.
I was about to just say, except my wife, because if I'm spending a lot of money. Yes.
You don't need that. You already have a phone that works.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Paul Hatala, new Paul or old Paul, or
so I was thinking as we're going along here, I don't think there's to me, it's not a great deal of difference. It just changes a little bit. Kind of like I said, I'm really simple. So in our household, we have a threshold that says if it's 4 digits, let's at least mention it to the other person. At work,
and that doesn't mean there's a decimal point in between the 2 and 2.
Correct. Yes.
4 digits in front of the decimal point.
And then, whereas at work they say, hey, by the way, you're at manager level X, so therefore you have this purchasing authority, and you need to get it signed off by someone else to go to this level. So it's not a great deal of difference. And I would say that the stakes are very high, because when I'm in the B2C realm, it's one of the 2 most important people in my life that I'm dealing with. I love the people that I work with, but not that much.
Yeah. So, but I'm trying to be nice with this. It's not slit your throat, but if you make the wrong decision, she will get upset with you.
It can happen. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Glenn Pride.
I agree with everything. It's a lot more complex, but I would say that with B2B, it's more or less you're trying to keep that value going, whereas B2C is very transactional. The satisfaction you get is basically transactional, whereas a B2B, it's like a long pull of engagement, typically, has been my experience.
I could see that somebody else, I mean, I have had $20,000 decisions I've made in the B2B world that were easier and less emotional than a $2,000 decision, at home in a B2C realm. I guess part of it is the larger the ticket item gets in the B2C, the more logic and research you do and the more rational you tend to become with it, where the more transactional or less cost. I know it's interesting to think about that. Brian Weber.
I think it comes down to where the value is being realized. B2C, it's you. That's where the value is. Where B2B, it's the company.
That might slit your throat.
Yes, either of them might, but as we've talked about, but B2C, you're really primarily focused on yourself. The value's coming to me. B2B, it's the larger company and the other stakeholders that have other people have mentioned things. So I think it's just realizing here's where the value, and also the cost.
Yeah.
$2,000 for me personally can
Maybe
be a lot
more,
harder than $100,000 for the company.
I get it completely. May Wong.
I feel like money matters a lot less in B2B, just like what everyone's saying. But like really, if there's a couple of vendors that you're evaluating and the cost difference is anywhere from 100K to 200K, or like if it does the job, you might go for the more expensive one. Whereas if you're looking at a $100 toothbrush or a $200 toothbrush, you say, why are toothbrushes $100 starting? So like that's kind of the difference between B2B and B2C. And the other one I think that I've kind of noticed is that B2C companies tend to have better designers. Because I've used a lot of B2B software and they're not great.
Well, it's not just in software, it's in everything, right?
In
Design is
everything.
probably more important to when the consumer is the buyer also.
Like you care a lot less about whether or not it looks good over functionality, right? Because like when you buy a piece of software or product or whatever it is that you need to do your job, like you need to, like, does it help you do your job? Does it have that functionality? And then does it look good is really not as important unless if it's like a marketing tool. So yeah.
Makes sense. Steve Johnson.
I think it's harder to buy from B2B companies because they don't know what they're selling. B2C companies say, you know what, look, we have this pen, buy it. And you go to a B2B company and they go, well, what do you want? I could write it for you. You could read it, we could do this we can come install it for you. And they have this menu of options. which is to me a lot like going to like Subway, and I'm like, I want the sandwich that's in that picture right there. And they're like, oh, did you want lettuce on that? Well, there's lettuce in the freaking picture. I want the one in the picture. And I'm the same way at the other place. Anyway.
Yes, the other place.
I think that in general, B2C products are designed to be easy to buy. And I think in B2B, they don't think that way. And while we're at it, they also want to hide the price because they don't really know what they're going to sell you and how much money you have. So I find it very difficult to buy from B2B vendors.
I like that. And what actually made me think of this question is member of the community, friend of the community, Zach Messler, product marketing guy. He will tell people that he goes, enter B2B sales changed in 2007 with the advent of the iPhone. And there's now much more information available to a B2B buyer than there ever was before. And so you see the emotional and social coming into the B2C, but I'm going to just do a blanket. I agree with everything that was said in this round. And we're going to then move on to our lightning round. And this does need to be a lightning round. We're running out of time. And regardless of if you're B2B or B2C, and I think most everybody here is B2B, if you could steal one thing, their approach, their capabilities, something from the other, what would it be? And I am going to start with Paul Hurwitz. If you could steal something from B2C that what they do well in product, what would it be?
Brand marketing. I think it's done so much better in the B2C world than in the B2B world.
All right, brand marketing. Glenn Pride.
I'm going to steal May's design.
All right, brand marketing and design. Paul Hatala.
I'd say that the drip marketing that B2C tends to have of frequent, consistent messaging.
Okay, so the drip marketing. Brian Weber.
The discovery process.
The discovery process. You think the discovery process is easier in B2C or better?
Easier and better. You can talk to your end customer.
Yes. Yeah. A lot easier to get to them because they're consumers, right?
Correct.
They live on our block. They go to our schools, kids' schools, that type of stuff.
Correct.
May Wong.
To, I guess, piggyback off of Brian's point, not just discovery, but the frequency that you do customer interviews too. Because I find B2C tends to do a whole lot more than B2B do.
Frequency of customer engagement and discovery and validation and stuff like that. Jason Vincelette.
Kind of ripping off Steve here, but simplification of packaging.
Okay, simplification of Steve. I don't think we've made it through this many people without somebody saying, "I'm just going to say what Brian said." Well, it's not always Brian, but somebody before that. Are you going to say that to what Jason said?
I guess I am going to have to go with ditto. I was playing with product-led growth. I feel like product-led growth is easier in B2C than B2B.
Yeah.
And I know that investors love the idea of product-led growth because apparently they hate salespeople too. But the cleaner you can make your value prop, which is easier to do, I suspect, in B2C, the more you can leverage the latest techniques in product-led growth. So I'm going to say product-led growth. And ditto Jason, who dittoed me. So that's a ditto squared.
I like all of those. And just a side note on your answer, when I was at a B2B information company, we actually put a strategy in place. This is back in 2003. We had some information people could get for free that would be valuable to them, some that they could get with an email address, some that they would get with a pay per use one at a time, and then a subscription. And then at the back end, we actually added value-added tools on top of it. I think I created product-led growth back then.
But did you write a book?
I did not.
See, there's where the mistake was made. I invented Scrum. I just didn't write a book.
I think my vote is going to be for it sort of is coming back to Paul's, but I'm going to talk about positioning specifically, right? I think that it's not just the brand, but they're so much better at understanding their target market in the value pains and gains that really factored in. And so I'm going to go with that. So, wow, what a conversation. I mean, I've been wanting for us to delve into B2B and B2C for a while. I did not think it was going to be this much. We had some great conversations. As I said, I say every week, I learned a lot. I learned a lot just reading your initial answer, and it really helped me process and think about this question and this topic in a different way. So for those of you who are listening to this, are not on the call, who've not been in the community, I invite you to go and look at the answer, because it's like 5 pages long. And you know, it's well worth the read. But you know, I want to thank everybody: Jason, Brian, Glenn, Paul, May, and my partner Steve. What a wonderful conversation on B2C versus B2B. There's a lot of topics I want to think of delving into in future ones from this one. And you know, we do this every week. Monday, the question goes in. May knows what the dissertation to write this week is about. Wednesday, we have the poll, and hopefully I get it in on time. And hopefully I'll learn now not to put my thoughts on what the right answer is in the top spot. And on Fridays, we have these wonderful calls. Thank you guys, everybody, so much. What a wonderful conversation today. Everybody have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week in the community. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.